Hi, my name is Benedict. This post is going to be broader. I've been working with somebody recently, a client, over teaching how to incorporate story into his work. And he's come to me because that idea of story and narrative is something that I talk about a lot. But at the beginning of our working together, it became apparent that he, and I've seen this with other people as well, probably didn't really understand what we mean by story in particular. And narrative, some weird word that highfalutin arty types use that means fuck all, which is part of why I chose the term story rather than being all like narrative in my artwork kind of thing. So, story. It does not mean, when you put story into art, it does not mean that there is a 58 chapter book with all these different actions appearing through your artwork here and here and here and here and here and here and here sort of thing. That's just not story, unless you just so happen to be writing a concept album. But we'll assume you're not, because people don't write concept albums anymore, which is kind of a shame, and actually also technically not true. It's just they don't go top 40 like War of the Worlds or Dark Side of the Moon. But perhaps if we think more in terms of a famous painting, that creates a scene. Now inside that scene, we have what we will call narrative or story. Sometimes that's kind of easy to pick. In the Impressionist painting of all those people standing and reclining by the riverbank, the Seine. I think it doesn't really matter what it is, but we get that story of it being an afternoon, lovely day, people going to the park. That's the story that tells in that scene. Beautiful piece of work, surprisingly powerful piece of work for what otherwise appears to be a pretty inane thing. But if it was that inane, would Chicago have had a hit with the very same thing? Saturday in the Park. Brilliant, beautiful song for something seemingly inane. So, when you're creating your piece of music, it needs to have a story, just as a painting needs to have a story. Yes, it can be fairly obvious, like that Impressionist painting of people just going to the park on a lovely day. There ain't nothing wrong with that story. It's a lovely story. We'd all hope to have those days. It can also be a little less obvious. So an example of a painting with a story that's a little less obvious is the Mona Lisa. Nobody really knows what that's about. It's an incredibly powerful piece of art. Whether you understand it or not, it's still a powerful piece of art. How do I know that? Because there are probably about 4 people in this world who have no idea what the Mona Lisa is. Therefore, super powerful. It's got a story. We just don't really know what it is. If we were to translate that into musical terms, we could equate that to the Eagles' Hotel California. Welcome to the Hotel California. That's a great big song. Just about everybody knows that. Just about everybody loves that. Dueling guitar solos in the end. Awesome work. Absolutely awesome. Faultless, flawless, tremendous work. What the hell's it about? Don't think anybody really knows. But it doesn't actually matter. Because the sense of narrative in that song is so strong that even though we don't really work out literally what the details are, and nor are we meant to, because Don Henley doesn't ever like to tell us what that song was literally about, because it would actually ruin it if we were to say that's this event, this event. It's the magic that it brings in us creating our own story. That's what makes that wonderful. So when you're making a piece of music and you think, okay, what's this piece of music about? And you must do that. What's the story I'm painting? What's the picture I'm painting? What's the feeling that I want people to have when they engage with this piece of music? Then it helps tremendously if you can see it in your head. Now you might go, Benedict, but you're full of shit because I write EDM big room, trance bangers, and that shit ain't about fuck. It's just about me working out with my 909 and proving how big my penis is to myself. Okay, cool. Guess what? You've just found your story. Next time you're in your big room trance venue, assuming you even go out, take a photo. Because that's the image, that's the feeling that you want your audience to feel. So they want to get their bounce on when they hear your tune. If not, it will come across to them as, it's just another fucking 909 going fuck, 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 fuck. And you'll wonder why you kind of don't build anything. Because you're not drawing people anywhere. You're not taking people who want to feel that, hands in the air, feel as though they were in the big room. You're not giving them that. So paint your picture, create your story. It's absolutely vital. Now, the way you do that is a combination of factors. And each of us as an artist, and if you think you're not an artist, either quit the business or think again. Artist does not mean that you have to be some kind of wanker who smokes a cigarette out here and all that kind of stuff. The world's greatest artists, like Stephen King, are not arty-farty. They merely get in there and do their thing, and they turn out good work. So you are an artist. Your job is not to play 909s real loud. Your job is to make people feel something, whatever that something is that you're setting out to achieve or being paid to achieve if you are working commercially, as in like writing for a film or writing for your record company that say, look, we liked your last banger, now we want this one to be even bangerier. Then you're working to a task. So you've got to have that picture of what you're trying to achieve. So how did this become such a tricky or a complex thing for people to do? I'm guessing here, but I'm pretty confident that I'm right. When I was growing up through the early to mid-80s, that's that time when I became 10 in 79 and therefore 20 in 89. That was that era in which I really took in music. I had a couple of advantages that people these days don't have. Now, you need to think very carefully on this before you try and throw out the baby with the bathwater here, so please hear me out and think about it without letting Mr. Ego get in the way here. I had two great advantages. One was a father who was a highly trained classical musician whose record collection was really good classical music and Baroque music. So music of those periods, and it was quality. And let me tell you, I don't recall him ever playing any Mozart, which is going to dent a lot of people's feelings, but it was Mahler, it was Haydn, it was Bach, Pachelbel, Scarlatti, to amuse us as kids, seeing obviously we had a simpler understanding of appetite. He would play Edvard Grieg, Peer Gynt Suite, and he came home with a cassette with Gustav Holst's The Planets on it, which of course I just grabbed and lapped up. So the advantage I had was that I was hearing incredibly well thought out and well delivered music from kind of around the time I was born, when my brothers first started bringing the demon pop music into the house in the late 70s. I struggled to get my head around it, to be honest. I say that because I know a lot of people now struggle to get their head around what they call classic rock. And this is the problem I see in understanding even the concept of story, that, hey, you are painting a scene, only you're doing it in sound rather than in colour on the end of a stick. God knows how anyone does that stuff. But once I started to understand the language in which rock and pop music worked, I started to enjoy it. It took a little bit of time. I had to keep hearing it And when I'd first put on my little AM radio and listen to Casey Kasem play the top 40, it was Billy Joel and Captain and Tennille, and what have you, and a lot of that stuff I did struggle to get. The Doobie Brothers. It wasn't that I disliked it, I just didn't understand the language. But then came a time, through immersing myself in it, I started to really understand the language. So where I already had some, but not a great, but some understanding instinctively of the material that my father was playing, particularly the simpler material, or the easier to get into, so Grieg, Holst, and I think there was the Firebird Suite. I quite liked that, in part because of the cover having this bird on it. It was like, ooh, cool. But I couldn't understand a lot of the language, but I started to understand the language of pop as well. And suddenly these songs started to make sense. I started to realize they were telling stories. Billy Joel was telling me stories about people in the bar as he's playing his piano. But Captain and Tennille were telling me stories about people who were in love or were no longer in love. Christopher Cross came along and started telling me stories about the feeling, the tremendous feeling of freedom as you go sailing. Rod Stewart did one around the same time too. I keyed into the stories more than a lot of other people. For a lot of people it was just... But I keyed into the story. So that's why, as a composer, I compose to story, more dramatically perhaps than many others. But that makes me a good film composer. I've won awards because that's my thing. It doesn't have to be your thing, but understanding it is going to make you a better composer, no matter what you want to do. So the problem that I say is that from about 1990 on, the idea of story and narrative in popular music has been increasingly crushed. So where I grew up listening to initially classical, and my father kept playing particularly Baroque music, even as I was sitting there listening to Deep Purple in my headphones going, why don't you stop that, you starry old bastard, this is good music, what you're doing is not good music, all that usual childish shit. But I was still listening to great music. It was still there. If you've grown up or decided to simply buy into the zeitgeist of the time, where you're listening to music that has no real narrative, no matter how much you think the words are cool or relate to you, the music has no real narrative of its own accord. It lacks lyricism, and that's nothing to do with words. Hotel California has tremendous lyricism over the whole piece. That's why we love those dueling guitars towards the end. The lyricism in that is just awesome. Or you could take Kiss, I Was Made for Loving You. I was made for loving you, baby. You were made for loving me. Take off the words. There's a beautiful lyricism in that. Might be simple, but it's a nice lyricism, which we've lost. EDM doesn't have that. The whole emphasis on and there isn't a lyricism in that. That's not to say those things can't be interesting and can't be used, but they don't have a lyricism. So we've got generations now that have grown up without simply having lyricism played to them. And we all generally kind of accept broadly that if you play great music to babies, even in the womb, they tend to come out a little bit more musical and a little bit more sorted about how things work. So it's the same thing. If you've grown up without understanding story, narrative, lyricism, then you're going to find it hard to actually put that into your work. I noticed when I started composing that it was not too uncommon for people to actually say, that sounds a bit Baroque. Do you listen to Pachelbel's Canon in D a lot? It's supposed to sound like new wave, it's like Gary Newman. But the reality was, yes, I listened to that stuff a lot. So it became my benchmark for how things flowed. So it made it easier for me to write that kind of thing. And if you're following me recently, the Parker Probe that I wrote, it's actually a piece of Baroque music. It comes out easier for me because I was steeped in it. As a teabag, I was dunked in Baroque music as a kid. I was dunked in what you now call classic rock as a kid. I was dunked in narrative, story, lyricism. So if you haven't been, and you're discovering that it is a flaw in your approach, your skill set, then number one thing I would say to you to do before you start trying to push at it in terms of saying, well, what notes do I write and all of that, screw those rules. Most of those are made up by people after the fact, or a garbage that you see on 2-minute tuts. Don't help you any, despite the ego boost that you get at that moment. Go and start listening to what you will be calling classic rock. If you don't have that stuff in your collection, then you bloody well should, but if you don't, then go to the demon Spotify or wherever you get music that you don't know from, and dial up a station that plays classic rock. So that means really anything up to about the mid to late 80s. That can include Motley Crue. It can include Black Sabbath, Candlemass. So don't feel if you're of the metallic variety that you can't have some Europe's Final Countdown. Brilliant metal, wonderfully lyrical. If you're only a kind of a person, you can listen to disco too, like real disco. And even some of the very cool post-disco stuff that came out in the early to mid-80s. Listen to funk and disco, but not to hear that, to be able to go, oh, look how clever I am because I'm listening to some good, but listen to how that actually translates into lyricism. Even there, it's not about the bat, it's about the of that, the lyricism of that. Steep yourself in that. Be a teabag and dunk yourself in that until it seeps in. Then approach somebody like myself or any teacher who has a good grounding in classical theory. Approach them and say, this is what I do. I want to get better at what I do. Because at no point am I saying to you here that, oh, you have to stop writing the stuff you do and do the stuff I do. No. Don't take that childish tone. Approach a classical person because they're well trained. You'll find a certain percentage of them will go, I can't help you with that, man. Fair enough, move on. But you'll also find some who'll go, yeah, not my teabag, but I can help you understand how to do that a bit better. And then go along with an open mind. And she will probably say a lot of stuff to you that goes, but again, you're there to soak it in. When I went to do exactly the same thing with somebody, he would say to me, now you've got this here. What I would do with this would be this. And a few times I quite arrogantly thought, what am I doing here? Why am I paying you money to make me feel stupid? But that's my problem. I was paying him money to help me see different ways of doing things. And you know what? My records after that improved quite dramatically. I suddenly could start to understand melody and how to manage it and how to solve my problems. When I got partway through a melody and was like, why do I do that? And would then make the lazy choices of just going like, well, I'll just put it in an arpeggiator and make it boring, done, because it wasn't unique. So steep yourself in the true art first. And the sooner you do that, the better. Because if you've been at this game for long enough to be wanting to watch this, especially for the time that I'm asking you to watch this over, I'm at 20 minutes in already, then chances are you've been doing this a while, which means that you've been learning bad habits. You've been building what you do into yourself. I answered a question on Quora not so long ago about why is it that people who sing non-stop in the shower and in the car and what have you, why is it that they don't become great singers? And I said that while they're putting time into singing, there's a big difference between just going in the car, which is amusing. You're vocalizing along with pop songs, nothing wrong with that, and actually training yourself. Because most people are singing in the shower, singing in the car, they're singing flat and they scream from one note to another. And if they listen to Christ Make It Stop Agony Era, then they're all like and think that that's good singing. So they learn an awful lot of bad habits, and through repetition, they actually build those bad habits in. It's called muscle memory. I know where a middle C is with minimal looking. Somebody who's better than me knows where a middle C is with no looking, because they've got that muscle memory of there it is. So if you've been at this a while, you're going to need to undo some of the habits you've got. Your habits, if you're in EDM, are probably to run straight to your 909 drum samples, to whack them through some kind of compressor and overdrive at the same time so that they're like, Stallman, man. And then to put in a great big bass line that's even more Stallman, and you've filled your whole space. You've only got this much bandwidth. Just like in my camera here, I've only got this much bandwidth. So when I put my hands out here, my hand ceases to exist. The camera didn't, like the photo didn't get any bigger. That's it. That's all I got to work with and have you with me. So if you've used all of this space with your drums and bass and the formulas, which are not actually helping you because you don't know how to control them, then you're done for. You've got no space left. So unlearn and start a new way. Listen to music that's very lyrical. Listen to music which has no drums. Yeah. Or very small drums. So listen to grab Kraftwerk's Autobahn record. Flip that mother over. Listen to the tracks on the back there. They're the really amazing material on that record. Barning on the Autobahn is cool. It's amusing and it's a great track. But the ones on the other side, Melody of the Comets, A Walk in the Morning, something or other, I can't remember the translation. Really lovely work. Listen to those. Work out how they work, why they work. That Walk in the Morning Breeze or whatever it is. Really beautiful, simple track. Doesn't have any drums, I don't think, or if it does, they're irrelevant. They merely drive it if they're there. I don't think they are. But you've got those sound effects, the simple little flute motif, and how that builds up. Understand how that feels. And then when you start writing, and even if you're going to say, hey, look, I want to write a big rib banger, or the deathiest of metaliest of killcore, start with where the real picture is. What's the scene there? So in terms of music, that's probably actually going to be your big chords. You're more likely to do that than if you start with drums and just go that's fucking boring. It's actually fun. It's like, that's cool. That's what you want your people to do. You don't want them to sit back and go, "Oh, that's so cool, man. I'll download it, I'll steal it, but I'm not going to pay for it, because it doesn't, musicians don't deserve to earn a living." And you don't deserve to earn a living if that's all you do. Put the passion in it so people go, "That's why I was made for loving you," still works. In a literal sense, it's trash. But in a pop music sense, it's brilliant. So come from that angle first. People still play popcorn now because it's so clever and it's fun. It's fun. If you're writing metal, rather than just dropping your tuning to Z and go, work out a good riff. I don't really know how to make a good riff with my math right now, so good luck with that. But hopefully you've got the understanding from the thing. Work out what that is. And then you can start to fill that in. Then you'll bring in your bass line. Because it's going to back what you're doing. It makes what you've done stronger, rather than it being the weakest element in your mix. Because when you start with a great drum and great big bass, everything after that just gets weaker, because you don't want it to compete. So start with the important elements. Like if you're writing a song, you'd start with the lyrics, start with the important elements, and then your bass, your drums, and all your parts, your arpeggios, your patterns, your all of that backs what that core message is. Whether that is a walk in the morning by a stream, or whether it's an instruction manual on how to kill zombies. Same. Different tones, but same. Really important thing to get, and you can do that to anything. Let me quickly walk you through this. You don't have to watch this bit if you really don't want to. You have to watch any of my video if you don't want to, but I'll walk you through a piece I've just finished. I haven't even checked the mix on it or anything, but just to show you, okay, here's this thinking in action in terms of a piece. It's called Curiosity and Insight. They are Mars rovers, things going off to Mars to learn stuff for NASA. The whole record is about NASA missions. I mentioned Parker Probe before. This is one of those. So where do we start? Weird noises. Kind of like Space Invaders. That reminds us that Mars is a funny place, it's alien. And it also reminds us that we're frightened of Martians. Which leads us to because that's a computer singing, it's not super clear, but the lyric there is Mars and Earth will become friends. So we're looking to understand Mars. Things we understand, we tend to be less frightened of. So rather than the whole ooh-la of Martians invading Earth, we've now got something that's very sophisticated sounding, because it sounds like a church choir talking about us becoming friends. Now, when I wrote this first, I just repeated that. But when I got to the point of the piece being kind of finished, I could have said, yeah, okay, render it off. But you know what? It wasn't really finished. It was repetitive. So, knowing a little bit more about choiry stuff from Midar, a variation. Still essentially the same thing. We've got a shape. You can see our shape here. Goes up. Mars and Earth will become friends. So real, just post-medieval choir chant. The same thing here, only we go up a bit. Let's just It's a bit bigger so we can see the 2. So there's our 2. People worry about melody being difficult. It's not difficult. Once you've steeped yourself, dunked your tea bag in enough good melodic material, you'll start to get a sense of where it needs to go. Oh, look, that needs to go up. So you move your note up a bit. Nah, that feels wrong. It needs to go a bit higher. So you move your note up even more. Or you put a bridging note between the 2. Maybe an uncomfortable leap at this point. Walks you up. It's more natural. Obviously, if you understand your basic theory of key and scale, then you're much better off. I've got a whole series where I show you how I've written a complex piece using transposers and key lockers to keep me in another key. So I can write in C major, all the way keys, transpose it up however many semitones to get to, I don't know, F sharp or something or other, and then lock it to F sharp. So it's not the best way of writing in another key, but it gives you the opportunity to work in that different feel that different keys give you. But so long as you can understand that, hey, I need to stick with the white notes, you can't go too far wrong. If it sounds daft, if you've got minor seconds, actually which won't play because that's a monophonic sound. If you've got minor seconds, you know what they are when you play the 2 together and you go, ugh. If you've got a mismatch, then you can just open the 2 lines together, work out what's wrong and decide which notes you want to have work together. Easy as. You know, if you want to get a grounding in that, go watch the video. It's Building the Peace Swords from the North. It's about how to cheat at music theory. So we've got a shape here, we've got an echo of the shape here, but rather than just doing the same thing, which becomes dull, I said, okay, let's have it go somewhere else. And it finishes, rather than on the root note, you generally want to start and finish on your root note. So it says to people, this is home, this is the center of the picture. This one finishes somewhere slightly different. It's finishing on the 3rd, so the E to our C. And that just says, hey, we're hanging at this point. Of course we're hanging at this point because we're about to start the actual piece. Now, what you should be recognizing there is that these strings, our Lee's instruments, are actually playing something that's an awful lot like that core melody. Those 4 bars there, I've extrapolated them out in a variation, something that's similar to but different from. So there's recognition, but there's difference. In terms of the other parts of the mix, we've got our drums. They're not dominant. They sit underneath the piece and roll it along and have got a very deliberate, sort of 1981 feel to them, with a bit of overdrive and ring modulation or what have you. So again, this is a variation of this, which is a variation of this. That was one of the things I really learned from that teacher of mine. He said, go home, you've got this little melody here, go home and I want you to come back with some variations of it. And he said, now the way to do that is you go, let's see if I've got a melodic sound here. I'll use this one. If that's my melody, that's my first thing I've written down. That's a variation. that's a variation. Starting in the same place, got roughly the same shape, roughly the same timing. So long, short, long. Long, short, long. Same, notes different. Or I can do same initial notes, different timing. So they're the two arenas in which you can play with, making things same but different. You don't want them to, you can't have a variation, well you can, but it's unwise. If that's our beginning, our answer is, that's just a little too random. So making melodies is knowing where your key is, which tells you where your third and fifth are. I can make this stuff up all day. Very basic theory. So we've got most of our elements in here. We've painted a little bit of a picture here with sound effect, with our choir, our drums and bass. That's giving us that, grand rolling feel. We then don't want to say, okay, I'm just going to take these bars here, that's 32 or whatever bars, I'm just going to loop those for 5 minutes because it's going to be boring as fuck. It really is. So we need to do something a bit different. That's a variation. Sometimes you can bring in a new idea, but for now that's a bit tricky for you, probably. So bring in a variation. See, so what we've got there is we're using some of the same sounds. That same choir has only got those lines to play. Couldn't be bothered writing more. I mean, it's hard. I don't write lyrics anymore. So we've got some similarity in here. We've carried over some sounds that we had before. We're giving ourselves a little bit more melodic movement with this line, even though it sits down inside the mix. But we've added something different with this fellow. Kudos if you know why I called it Philip. It's giving us a rhythmic variation with the combination, the movement between the very simple drum pattern and the arpeggio, and then of course with the very small melodic movement that we've got here. Seeing it's a choir and seeing it's a bit post-medieval, minimal movement is very appropriate here. I reintroduce our sound effect. Just to remind us, this is about aliens. A little bit of variety with drums, and then another variation. We're still basically riffing on those first 4 bars, pulling them out. So that's, because this is 3/4 of the way through our piece, this is the place for our slash stands on the piano solo. This is where it gets to its peak, its crescendo, that's here. So we've got that. And then it comes... So this sounds very complex in a simple sort of a way. But it sounds quite grand. But let me tell you, it ain't. It's illusion, which all good music is. All good music and all good paintings are illusion. We think Mona Lisa's looking at us? No, she ain't, because her eyes are stuck to the canvas. So we've got our basic part, which is basically this. It's stretched out. It's just basically that. This started as that as well. I just thought, well, I'll layer them, and when I put in this, nice lead sound, it gives me a sound. But it also sounds a little bit half-assed from a composery point of view, musical point of view, narrative point of view. This is the point where we need to be, really grand. We've reconciled Mars and Earth. This is like world peace, interworld peace. So I reworked this bit. Let's just pull it back into view. Where this started here, the note started here. Oh. It moved up. I then said, okay, let's start it up here, an octave above. So as soon as that comes in, we've got that variation before, which is quite different. And it comes in up here, which makes it sound triumphant. I work back down because I'm looking for familiarity here as well. So I work back down into the matched material. So it starts, if we take these two together, this is our original line. That's our choir. If we now go to the lead, see how it just has a couple of notes which are different. We notice that difference. It creates some harmonics that weren't really there before because there's not a lot of not a lot of harmony in this. I'm not great at harmony. Don't tell anyone. So we start high, got a couple of harmonies there. It then falls into the familiar. Important. After Slash has finished doing his thing and fallen off the piano, we either go into another sort of a middle 80 kind of thing, which is sort of what we got here, or we often go back into the chorus. So, I was made for loving you, babe. Because we know it, and at that point it's like, feels huge. That's the equivalent of in EDM, you do some the kind of thing, you drop all the stuff, and then bam, you hit them again with a beep, 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 and the crowd just go boom. Only in rock, that feeling should last longer. In techno, it seems to last a couple of seconds before they go, yeah, back to being bored again. Because there's no narrative. The only thing you've got to sell is a little bit more speed, which wears off super fast. It's like really cheap, shitty cocaine. Whereas when you play with melody and narrative, you can make it last longer, which is why Hotel California is a tremendously popular song, even though it's quite long. So we're matching our main section at this point, but then I wander off again. So what we're doing here, your Mars and Earth stuff's going to be a bit off. So again, that's creating a crescendo. It's pulling up and up and up. The harmonies and slightly interesting choices of notes there are creating tension. So when we hit this C, which is a root note of our piece, there's this sense of like, it's a high C, it's where we started. We've come back to where we started. We started here, we went on a little journey. Right back where we started. Comfortable. Melodies are not that hard. I put some effect into here because it needs to carry itself onto the next bit, which is the end bit. Going back to the medieval choir feeling of pushing that silly little message, backing it with our string sections, but you'll see here that while they look similar, they're different. In this case, we've got what would be the left hand. So you've got our chords or we've got our melodic movement up the top. Happening up top, and obviously not related to the notes, but that's what that is. You can see that here when you look at that. But then here, we've inverted it. Well, I've inverted it. This is my piece. It's all about me. I've inverted it. So that's put this on top. So with this sound, playing our... well, it's probably up here. Gives us a different feel because it changes the harmony relationships, even though they're the same notes, here and here, and actually here and here. So we've got our lead choir, our solo choir person singing the melody, and our choir singing the boring bit. So here we've got exactly the same pieces of material, just changed around. Nothing but the order of octaves here. We've got our friend Philip just playing what's close to a grand bass, which is exactly the same as the bass line, except the bass is dropped at this point, but it's still providing that bass, as well as adds movement and some harmonic interest as it plows through those notes. But the lead here is doing something slightly different again. So the lead is actually based on this. So if we take this and open these fellas up, put them into view, we've got the choir singing this, and we've got our lead playing this. Similar, but not the same. So together, just gives that little bit of movement. Now this is fairly quiet because I'm really selling just this at the moment. But you don't really want to listen to that on its own for too long, because you've been hearing it all the way through the piece, so we've simply built it back up. If we kill this lead, it's out now. We put it back in, and even though it's small, it gives this feeling of, well, there's somebody playing off. So in a good Gunners song, you would actually hear Slash playing through. It's a kind of solo. It's not the screaming solo, but it's just the long, loping, slow, soloing ad-lib to fade, which is exactly what we do here. I fade this before the section even fully finishes. So by the time it's faded out, you know there was actually a little bit more to go, which makes you want to hear it finished. But because you know you can't hear it finished, because it finished, you're more likely to want to go again. Gotcha. So, overview. We've got out to 49 minutes, almost short for me. Story. Doesn't matter what style you write, you want to have a story. Now, see that story. Go on to Google. Google images. Google pictures that have the elements that you want in your musical painting. Pin them to your monitor if necessary, so you can refer to them. And then you can say, these are the elements. These are the elements I need to describe, I need to paint. If we were painting Napoleon, what would be the most important thing in that painting? Well, bloody Napoleon, wouldn't it? So you'd have a picture of Napoleon and you'd work out, well, how do I represent him? What's Napoleon famous for? Not doing it to Josephine, but actually conquering the whole bloody world and being a bit of a pig about it. So you might actually start with something martial, whether that's snares, military snares, or something grand and triumphant and strident as he marches his wee self across the world. You're going to set your backdrop, which is, here's the space we're working in. And then you can add all the extra elements. How you do that obviously defines your piece as opposed to anybody else's piece about Napoleon. We have to write a piece about Napoleon now. So that's story. You don't have to tell the whole sordid lifestyle of Napoleon. You're just representing the way he stepped across the world and trod all over it, and that can be enough. Or you may choose to say, look, in the beginning, I'm going to show the Grand Napoleon. In the middle, I'm going to show this Napoleon. And then at the end, I'm going to show the end of Napoleon, which is Battle of Waterloo, off to live in a hut in Elba with you, Napoleon. In which case it becomes an echo of the beginning because he's the same man. You pick up some of the bits from the middle because obviously he's a man who's weakening. He's losing his power and hold. And at the end, then you're going to have a smaller version of that with little instruments echoing the earlier lines. But we've got a man who's lived a grand life. Whether you agree with what he did or not, he's still lived an enormous life. He lived it large. But he's stuck in a little box now. That's really interesting material. That's story. You can choose how you play that out because it's your painting. But have that sense of story, and how do I paint in those elements? Just as good old Tchaikovsky did in the 1812 when he actually brought in cannons. I mean, he was being a bit of a wank, really, just appeasing the masses with novelty with cannons, but it's made the piece tremendously successful because it's still good music. Fiddle, 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 cannons. Fiddle, 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 cannons. Nothing wrong with that because he still wrote a great piece of music. So, idea, have a good sense of being able to see what the scene is you are painting here. Set up, have the right elements. If we need to have cannons, you are unlikely to use a flute to play cannons. So the usual solution when they're short of artillery in their orchestra, or the venue says no weaponry, then they will use timpani. You substitute. But they use timpani, but remember, they rarely use flutes. Can't remember which way you hold the bloody thing. Because there just isn't a lot of correlation. If you weren't allowed to have artillery, and you weren't allowed to have timpani, you probably should find a better venue, but that might happen. You just don't have either of them. Then you could use tuba. Ball, ball, ball. I hope that all helps. Any questions, please ask me. Pretty approachable guy. Thank you.